There is a silence that pierces louder than any scream, not a word spoken, no blame cast, no revenge sought, yet within this stillness, something begins to unravel. The narcissist, in their essence, is hollow, a being constructed from reflections, always seeking a mirror, a reaction, a validation. Their identity is not a seed planted in soil, but a mask worn on stage, a mask that demands applause to remain alive. But what happens when the mirror does not reflect? What happens when the applause fades into silence? The super empath does not rage. They do not fight for dominance in the theater of ego. Instead, they observe, calm, grounded, they see, and this is unbearable, because to be truly seen is to be rendered powerless, exposed beyond manipulation. The empath feels deeply, but does not bleed for show. They love, but not to control. They understand the game, but do not play it. Where the narcissist wears a crown of false self, the empath walks barefoot, touching the ground of truth with every step. To the narcissist, this is torture, not because the empath is cruel, but because they are immune to the hooks, the gaslight, the bait, the performance. The empath's detachment is not cold, it is clarity. And clarity cuts sharper than any blade. Where the narcissist needs chaos to feel alive, the super empath becomes stillness itself. That stillness reflects everything the narcissist wishes to deny: the fragility of their identity, the emptiness behind their charm, the illusion behind their dominance. They cannot seduce the ocean, nor confuse the mountain. And so, they rage against the unmovable, they suffocate in the silence. This is not vengeance, this is consequence, and it unfolds, naturally, inevitably, like winter follows the fall. For when truth no longer feeds illusion, the mask slips. And what remains is not power, it is pain. The narcissist, at their core, is not rooted in the same psychological soil as most others. While many individuals grow through internal reflection, learning from emotional experiences, and forming an identity through an authentic process of becoming, the narcissist takes a different path, a detour of survival through illusion. Their self is not something deeply felt or sincerely known. It is not built from quiet hours of solitude or honest reckoning with one's flaws and humanity. Instead, it is assembled like a costume stitched from the perceptions of others. They are who you think they are. They are what you react to. They exist in the space between stimulus and response. Without reaction, their sense of identity begins to flicker like a flame struggling for oxygen. To understand the narcissist's dependency on external validation, one must first realize that their inner world is largely a void. It is not just a shallow pond, it is a dry riverbed. There is a chronic emptiness, a deep sense that they are fundamentally not enough. But this awareness is buried beneath layers of denial and defense. It is too painful to acknowledge consciously. So instead of confronting this inner desolation, they construct an elaborate identity, one based on grandiosity, superiority, charm, intelligence, or any trait that sets them apart and above. This identity, however, is not supported by a foundation of truth. It is a mask, and masks must be held up. This is where external validation comes in. Validation, for the narcissist, is not simply affirming, it is existential. A compliment is not just pleasing, it is fuel. A like, a stare, a laugh, a sign of envy or admiration, these are not optional niceties. They are psychological oxygen, and just like the body gasps for air when it's deprived, the narcissist becomes desperate when attention or affirmation is withdrawn. Without it, they begin to deteriorate internally. They may become anxious, depressed, enraged, or manipulative in attempts to restore the flow of validation. It is not that they merely like being admired, they need it. And this need is insatiable. The illusion they live by must constantly be reflected back to them. If they think they are powerful, they need you to treat them with reverence. If they believe they are attractive, they need you to respond with desire. If they see themselves as intelligent, they expect you to be in awe of their insights. This isn't a preference. It is the structure that keeps their false self alive. When others deviate from this reflection, when someone offers criticism or simply stops feeding the illusion, the narcissist experiences what is called narcissistic injury. This wound is not just to the ego, it is to the whole self concept. It shakes the fragile construction they depend on, and it often provokes extreme reactions: rage, retaliation, smear campaigns, silent treatments, or attempts to punish and manipulate. Control is the second part of the equation. The narcissist must control how others see them because their identity is externally manufactured. To control perception, they must control people. This doesn't always look aggressive. It can be charming, seductive, persuasive, even helpful. But the motive underneath is consistent: to keep others within a script that props up their self-image. The narcissist scripts your role in their life. You are the admirer, the follower, the audience, the support, the echo. If you step outside of that role, if you assert your own identity, if you disagree, if you criticize, or even if you grow beyond them, they interpret it as betrayal. This is why narcissists often sabotage those close to them who begin to shine on their own. The spotlight must remain on the narcissist. Others are only valuable to the extent that they enhance the narcissist's self-view. When validation is withdrawn or when control slips, the narcissist feels a sense of collapse. This collapse is not necessarily visible on the outside. Many narcissists will double down, seeking new sources of validation, intensifying their control tactics, or shifting into victimhood to manipulate sympathy. But underneath, there is panic, there is shame, there is fear. Most narcissists will never admit these emotions, but their behavior reveals them. They may accuse others of the very things they fear within themselves. They may launch desperate attempts to win back admiration or to destroy those who expose their vulnerability. The goal is always to restore the illusion, to re-establish the false self, even if it means emotional violence. It's important to understand that this pattern is not chosen in a conscious or malicious way by every narcissist. In many cases, it stems from developmental wounds. As children, some narcissists were only loved when they performed, when they achieved, when they pleased. Their true emotions might have been ignored or punished, so they learned early to be safe. One must become what others admire. Over time, this adaptation hardens into identity, but what was once a survival strategy becomes a prison. They lose access to their authentic self. They forget how to connect, how to feel without an audience, and so they keep performing, but the applause never fills the void. In fact, the more they receive, the more they need. It is a hunger that grows with each feeding. The narcissist is acutely sensitive to the energy of others. They can often detect who will validate them, who will submit, and who will challenge their image. They are drawn to people who reflect them positively, those who offer admiration, empathy, or status. But the moment that admiration becomes inconsistent or is withdrawn, the narcissist shifts. What was once idealization quickly becomes devaluation. The very qualities they once praised you for become the ones they attack. This flip is not about you. It is about the narcissist preserving their self-illusion. You have gone from being a supportive mirror to a threat. And threats must be neutralized. This is also why narcissists often cycle through relationships. They idealize someone when that person gives them abundant validation. But over time, as reality intrudes, as flaws are noticed, as admiration fades, the narcissist begins to devalue. They become critical, contemptuous, even cruel. They may discard the person altogether in search of a new source, a fresh mirror, untainted by reality. The cycle repeats, not because they are never satisfied, but because they are using others to fill a need that no person can ultimately satisfy, the need to feel whole without actually becoming whole. Some narcissists learn to perform humility, to feign vulnerability, to mimic emotional depth. They may study empathy, not to feel it, but to better manipulate it. They may present themselves as spiritual, enlightened, or emotionally intelligent, especially if such traits bring validation in their social circles. But underneath the performance, the core need remains the same, to be seen in a way that reinforces the fantasy of who they wish they were. Authentic connection requires vulnerability, mutuality, and truth, qualities that threaten the narcissist's false self. So even when they pretend to connect, there is always a hidden agenda: to be admired, to be worshipped, or to remain in control. This is why relationships with narcissists often feel exhausting. You are not engaging with a whole person, you are engaging with a mask that constantly needs to be reinforced. You are not loved for who you are, but for how you reflect them. If you change, grow, or express boundaries, the illusion is threatened. And because the narcissist cannot survive without the illusion, they may attack your very growth as disloyalty. You were not supposed to outshine the sun. You were not supposed to question the script. Their need for control is not limited to individuals. It extends to environments. They may manipulate group dynamics, triangulate relationships, or spread misinformation to maintain dominance. They may subtly erode your confidence so that you become more dependent on them. The less you trust yourself, the more you serve their narrative, the more you second guess your worth, the more they can shape your reality. Control is not always overt. Sometimes it is woven into compliments, favors, or gift, each laced with an unspoken contract. You owe me admiration in return. The narcissist cannot tolerate true equality, because equality implies vulnerability, negotiation, and mutual respect. But in the narcissist's world, everything is a hierarchy. They must be on top, morally, intellectually, emotionally, socially. If they sense you are above them in any way, they may try to diminish you. If they see you as below them, they may exploit you. Either way, the relationship is never horizontal. It is always a vertical transaction, and the narcissist must remain at the apex. When you challenge that positioning, you threaten the illusion, and the response will be swift rage, coldness, deflection, or guilt tripping. Even their acts of kindness often carry an undertone of debt. They may help you, support you, praise you, but always with the expectation that you will reinforce their image. If you accept their help but later assert independence, they feel betrayed. If you offer criticism, even gently, they may accuse you of ingratitude. Every interaction is part of a ledger, and your role is to stay in emotional debt. The moment you reclaim your autonomy, you disrupt the balance they have crafted. You stop being a mirror, and you become a person. And that is intolerable. This dependence on validation and control is what makes the narcissist so reactive to boundaries. Boundaries are seen not as healthy expressions of self-respect, but as personal rejections. When you say no, you are not simply declining a request, you are threatening the narcissist's sense of power. When you distance yourself, you are not just protecting your peace, you are challenging their narrative. This is why many narcissists will escalate when boundaries are introduced. They will gaslight, guilt, or manipulate in order to pull you back into the familiar role. the one who reflects, admires, obeys. It is a tragic existence, not because of its grandeur, but because of its fragility. The narcissist appears powerful, but they are ruled by fear. Fear of exposure, fear of irrelevance, fear of being truly known. And so they cling to external validation like a life raft, mistaking attention for intimacy, control for connection, admiration for love. But none of these can substitute for the quiet knowing of the self. And until that knowing is cultivated from within, they remain trapped, forever constructing a house of mirrors, never entering the stillness of their own being. The super empath does not operate from impulse. Where others might lash out or collapse in the face of manipulation or cruelty, the super empath becomes still, not because they are cold, but because they understand, and in understanding, they gain choice. They do not react, they respond. That response is not emotional chaos, not counterattack, not justification. It is detachment rooted in deep clarity. The narcissist thrives in drama. Their world is made of roles, of performances, of carefully crafted narratives in which they are the star, the victim, or the hero, but never truly themselves. They pull others into this drama not only to gain control, but to define reality. This is the arena in which they feel strongest. When others are off balance, uncertain, or emotionally destabilized, for most people, it's easy to fall into the web of confusion. You try to explain, you try to reason. You plead, you cry, you get angry, you defend yourself, and in doing so, you fuel their illusion. You confirm that they have power. The super empath is different, not because they feel less, but because they feel everything, and they've learned to transmute it. The empath sees the projection, they see the bait, they see the attempt to provoke a reaction, to twist a truth, to trap them in an emotional response that reaffirms the narcissist's control. And rather than fight that game, they simply choose not to play. They remain present, unshaken, unmoved, not out of apathy, but out of sovereignty. The power of the super empath lies not in confrontation, but in refusal, refusal to be distorted, refusal to abandon themselves. Detachment in this context is not disconnection from reality. It is connection to a deeper one. It is not denial of emotion. It is mastery over it. The super empath is not numb. They are exquisitely aware of the emotional currents around them, but they do not drown in them. They can sit with discomfort, observe manipulation, endure projection, and still remain clear. This clarity is a mirror that reflects the narcissist's illusion back to them, and it is unbearable. The narcissist pushes, expecting you to break. They lie, expecting you to believe. They provoke, expecting your anger. But the super empath does not meet them where they are. The empath does not respond with desperation or fury. They respond with silence, calm, and observation. The narcissist begins to sense that something is wrong, not in the empath, but in the system they've come to rely on. The game no longer works. The mirror no longer flatters. The audience no longer applauds. This is when the narcissist feels most threatened, because their power is not physical, it is psychological. It is built upon your reaction. When there is no reaction, they lose their grasp. They cannot seduce someone who sees through the charm. They cannot guilt someone who is immune to false responsibility. They cannot gaslight someone whose inner world is already anchored in truth. And they cannot dominate someone who does not fear the withdrawal of approval. Stillness is misunderstood. It is not weakness. It is presence without panic. It is awareness without attachment. It is power that does not announce itself. The super empath has learned to be still, not as a defense, but as a discipline. When chaos erupts, they do not become chaotic. When accusations fly, they do not rush to defend. When silence is used as a weapon, they do not tremble in abandonment. they have made peace with solitude. They have learned that their worth is not dependent on being seen a certain way. This is what tortures the narcissist, not revenge, not resistance, but irrelevance. When the empath stops explaining, the narcissist begins to unravel. When the empath stops reacting, the narcissist panics. When the empath looks at them not with fear or longing, but with quiet recognition, they are faced with something they cannot tolerate, the truth. The truth that they are not who they pretend to be, the truth that their power was never real, the truth that the one person they believed they controlled now sees them entirely and remains unshaken. The empath does not need to scream, their silence speaks louder, their withdrawal of energy is not passive, it is deliberate. They do not argue because they have nothing to prove, they do not expose because they do not need vengeance. They simply disengage fully and completely. This is the wound the narcissist cannot heal, because they cannot reclaim power over someone who no longer plays the role they've written for them. Empaths have long been seen as vulnerable, easily manipulated, too kind, too trusting. And in their early stages of awakening, they often are. They love deeply, they give freely, they believe in redemption, but the super empath is not naive, they are forged in fire. They have felt every wound, carried every projection, and survived every emotional war. And in surviving, they have shed the belief that they must save others at the cost of themselves. The super empath does not seek to change the narcissist. They see the wound beneath the mask, but they no longer confuse compassion with sacrifice. They understand that healing must be chosen, not forced, that love does not mean tolerance of abuse, that forgiveness does not require contact, and most importantly, they understand that truth does not scream, it simply stands, quietly, unshakably, until all illusions dissolve in its presence. Clarity is not dramatic, it does not rush to expose, to punish, to convince, it just is. The super empath embodies this clarity. When the narcissist denies, the empath sees. When the narcissist shifts blame, the empath returns to center. When the narcissist demands, the empath remains free. This freedom is the ultimate disruption to the narcissist's world, because in the end, the narcissist is not afraid of losing the empath's love. They are afraid of losing their control over it. Control is the illusion the narcissist depends on. They must believe that they are always in charge of the narrative, always the one directing the emotional weather. But the super empath writes no such script. They do not need to be the storm or the sunshine. They are the sky. Everything passes through, but nothing alters their essence. This unchanging presence is what eventually exposes the narcissist, not through confrontation, but through contrast. Imagine standing before a calm lake after thrashing wildly in stormy water. The stillness reveals your own turbulence. The narcissist cannot withstand this mirror. It does not flatter, it does not react, it does not lie. It simply reflects, and the reflection is clear, too clear, no distortion, no filters, just the raw, honest image of who they are, and they cannot bear it. This is the true power of the super empath, not in domination, not in conflict, but in a depth of self, knowing so profound that no manipulation can reach it. They walk away not to hurt, but to heal, and their absence becomes a kind of echo that the narcissist cannot silence. It reminds them of everything they once controlled and no longer do, everything they thought they owned and never did, everything they pretended to be and were never seen as. There is nothing more painful to the narcissist than the loss of control. And there is no greater loss of control than when someone sees through them and simply walks away. No drama, no fight, just peace. For the narcissist, this peace is deafening. It says, I see you and I no longer fear you. I no longer need to fix you. I no longer belong to this story. And in that moment, the narcissist is left alone, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. alone with the emptiness they have always tried to outrun. The super empath does not destroy the narcissist, they illuminate them, and in that illumination, the narcissist is faced with a choice they rarely make, to evolve or to collapse. Most choose collapse. Not because they are doomed, but because evolution requires surrender, and surrender is something the false self cannot do. But for the empath, evolution has already happened. They have already surrendered to truth, to growth, to the wisdom of experience. And in that surrender they have found themselves. Their detachment is not disconnection, it is liberation. Their clarity is not arrogance, it is awareness. Their stillness is not avoidance, it is presence. And this presence is the one thing the narcissist cannot predict, cannot control, cannot become. It is what makes the super empath untouchable, not because they do not feel, but because they have felt everything and transformed it into power. Quiet power, still power, power that does not burn but reveals. The narcissist lives inside a carefully maintained illusion. It is a house of mirrors where every reflection has been arranged to confirm one thing, that they are who they pretend to be. Whether they adopt the image of the hero, the genius, the victim, the seducer, or the martyr, it is not their true self that lives behind these personas. It is a defense mechanism, a mask, a patchwork identity stitched together from the admiration, attention, and fear of others. Beneath it all, there is a void they dare not face, and because the illusion is so fragile, it must be protected at all costs. The narcissist must control perception, yours, theirs, and everyone else's. They are skilled at this. They shape narratives with precision. They learn what to say and what not to say, when to praise and when to withdraw. They study you, identifying your vulnerabilities and dreams. They adapt their mask to suit what will bring the highest return of validation. If kindness is admired, they will become benevolent. If intelligence is admired, they will parade their intellect. If spirituality is in demand, they will speak the language of depth and inner peace. But it is not real, it is imitation. The narcissist wears authenticity like a costume. They mimic what they see earns trust, but there is no rootedness in it. There is no soul behind the performance. Only a hunger for control. This entire construct, however sophisticated, depends on one essential thing, that others do not see through it, that the illusion remains intact, that the narcissist's version of themselves remains unchallenged. This is why they surround themselves with people who reflect their ideal image, admirers, enablers, people who question little and affirm much. This is why they become hostile when confronted with feedback, correction, or disagreement. It is not merely discomfort, it is an existential threat. To threaten the illusion is to threaten the narcissist's very sense of self. Enter the empath, not merely an emotionally sensitive person, but one with intuitive clarity. The empath does not just feel emotions, they perceive dynamics, they notice the shift behind the smile, they hear what is not said, they sense incongruence in energy, in tone, in timing. The empath walks into a room and picks up what is real and what is hidden. They do not need to be told, they do not need evidence. Their perception is immediate, deep, and unsettling to those who rely on distortion. At first, the narcissist is drawn to this. There is something magnetic about the way the empath sees into people. The narcissist believes they can control this attention, turn it toward themselves, and feed off the empath's attunement. They see the empath's understanding as admiration. They mistake presence for submission. But the empath is not easy to deceive for long, while they may initially be charmed, because they tend to look for the best in others. The empath begins to notice patterns. They begin to feel the mismatch between words and actions, the subtle coercion behind the kindness, the need for praise that overshadows mutuality. The empath is not fooled by gestures without energy. They know when a compliment is meant to manipulate. They know when vulnerability is used as a hook. They sense when the tears are rehearsed, when the apology is performative, when the support is strategic. This clarity does not come from judgment, it comes from inner alignment. The empath is not looking for perfection, they are looking for truth, and when truth is absent, they do not rage, they observe. This observation becomes unbearable for the narcissist. Not because the empath says anything directly, but because they see. And to be seen without the mask, without the illusion, is intolerable to someone who has built their entire identity upon not being truly known. The empath's perception acts like light through fog. It dissolves the performance. Even in silence, it challenges the narrative. Even in stillness, it confronts the lie. The narcissist can feel it. The empath sees too much, knows too much, understands without being told. And that understanding cannot be controlled. The empath doesn't argue. They don't scream. They don't threaten. They simply know. And that knowing creates a disturbance the narcissist cannot resolve. For every strategy the narcissist deploys, flattery, guilt, rage, seduction, the empath does not react as expected. The empath begins to withdraw their emotional energy, not out of punishment, but out of clarity. They realize the connection is not real, that the love is conditional, that the interaction is not a meeting of souls, but a manipulation of roles. And once they see this, they cannot unsee it. This is when the narcissist begins to feel exposed. Their mask begins to crack under the weight of truth. The empath, in their quiet refusal to play along, becomes a mirror, not one that flatters, but one that reflects reality. The narcissist sees in that mirror not the image they have crafted, but the emptiness they have hidden. And it terrifies them. They may lash out, trying to regain control. They may shift the blame, paint the empath as cold, ungrateful, unstable. They may increase their charm, promise change, plead for forgiveness. But the empath is no longer responding from emotion. They are responding from vision. This vision is not vengeful. It does not seek to destroy. It simply sees. And that seeing is the most powerful force the narcissist has ever encountered. Because in the presence of someone who is no longer deceived, the narcissist can no longer deceive themselves. They are forced to confront the illusion they have spent their entire lives constructing. And they will do almost anything to avoid this. They will discard the empath, smear them, try to replace them. They will surround themselves with people who continue the fantasy, but the memory of that perception lingers. The wound is not from what was done, it is from what was seen. The empath, meanwhile, does not need to fight. They do not need to expose the narcissist to the world. Their knowing is enough. It has always been enough. Their power lies not in confrontation, but in presence. Because while the narcissist spins tales and plays roles, the empath stands still in reality. That stillness is what threatens. That unwavering clarity, that refusal to deny what is real, that quiet acceptance of truth, it breaks the illusion in ways force never could. The narcissist might accuse the empath of betrayal, but what they really mean is, you stopped believing in me. Not the real them, the persona, the fantasy, the curated self. And when the empath no longer buys the lie, the narcissist feels annihilated, not harmed physically, but dismantled psychically. Their existence was never built on authenticity. It was built on agreement. And now, someone they thought they controlled no longer agrees. The spell is broken. The empath, by contrast, grows stronger in this process, because with every falsehood they see through, they reclaim a part of themselves. They release the need to save, to fix, to heal others who are committed to remaining unhealed. They stop confusing empathy with self-abandonment. They begin to protect their energy not from fear, but from wisdom. They learn that seeing someone does not mean staying with them, that loving someone does not mean losing yourself, that compassion does not mean accepting deception. This evolution is what makes the empath powerful. They no longer serve the illusion. They no longer participate in the performance. They do not try to change the narcissist. They simply change their own alignment. They speak truth not with fury, but with serenity. They withdraw not in anger, but in peace, and this peace is what undoes the narcissist, because the narcissist cannot live in peace. Peace reveals too much. In silence, the mask slips. In stillness, the shadows surface. And without distraction, the truth becomes unavoidable. For the narcissist, the empath becomes a symbol of everything they cannot control, cannot become, and cannot hide from. And so, they will often try to erase the empath, to devalue them, to diminish them, to convince others that the empath was never who they appeared to be. But these efforts are hollow, because the empath no longer needs validation from the narcissist or their audience. They have found something deeper, sovereignty, and that sovereignty is what destroys the illusion, not by force, but by contrast. It is the difference between firelight and a spotlight. The spotlight flatters, dramatizes, exaggerates. The firelight simply illuminates. The narcissist is addicted to the spotlight. The empath becomes the firelight, quiet, steady, unwavering. There is no war between them. There is only perception. And perception, once aligned with truth, needs no defense. It simply exists. It does not argue with illusion. It exposes it, not with violence, but with presence, not with noise, but with knowing. And once truth is known, the illusion cannot return to power. The narcissist will search for others who continue the fantasy. They will try to rewrite the story, but somewhere in the back of their mind, the empath remains, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of what was seen, of what cannot be unseen, of who they truly are beneath the illusion. And while they may run from that vision for the rest of their lives, it will never leave them, because the empath saw them fully and said nothing, because truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be witnessed. And once it has been witnessed, everything changes, not always for the narcissist, but always for the empath. Manipulation is the narcissist's instrument of survival, not merely a tactic, but a way of navigating the world. It is how they maintain power, attention, and control in relationships that are built not on mutual respect, but on dominance and submission. It is not always loud or aggressive. More often it is subtle, insidious, and disguised beneath layers of charm, vulnerability, persuasion, or strategic victimhood. The narcissist does not see people as individuals with boundaries and wills of their own, but as extensions of their internal landscape, objects meant to mirror their superiority, manage their shame, or soothe their inner emptiness. The narcissist thrives on influence, not earned through genuine connection, but extracted through psychological leverage. The empath, by nature, is receptive. They are open. Their emotional landscape is deep and fluid, and they often feel the emotions of others as if those emotions were their own. This trait is both a gift and a burden, especially in the presence of a narcissist who sees this openness not as beauty, but as vulnerability to be exploited. The empath may initially be drawn into the narcissist's world by the intensity, the affection, the apparent connection. Narcissists are masters at knowing what to say and how to say it, and empaths, being emotionally intuitive, are often touched by what seems like emotional honesty or wounded depth. But as the relationship unfolds, the empath begins to feel the undercurrent of manipulation. It may begin with guilt, tripping, subtle suggestions that their needs are unreasonable or that their reactions are too intense. It might escalate into gaslighting, where the narcissist denies reality, alters facts, and makes the empath question their own memory and judgment. There will be love bombing followed by devaluation, idealization followed by withdrawal, attention followed by silent treatment. The narcissist operates like a pendulum, creating confusion, fostering dependency, and destabilizing the empath's internal compass. The goal is not to love but to dominate, not to understand but to control. But something unexpected begins to happen. The empath, through the pain, starts to wake up. The confusion that once clouded their judgment becomes a source of clarity. The exhaustion from the emotional roller coaster leads them inward, where they begin to question not just the narcissist's behavior, but the deeper reasons they tolerated it. And as they awaken, they begin to change. Not dramatically, not with explosive confrontation, but subtly, internally, quietly. They stop reacting. The narcissist thrives on reaction. Every outburst, every tear, every explanation, every plea, it is all fuel. It confirms the narcissist's central delusion that they have control, that they matter more, that they are powerful enough to alter another's reality. But when the empath stops feeding the dynamic, the narcissist begins to falter. Their tactics don't land the same, the guilt trips don't work, the gaslighting doesn't destabilize, the seduction doesn't seduce, the threats don't provoke fear, and the silence doesn't command attention. The empath becomes immune, not because they've hardened, but because they've healed. They have begun to see manipulation not as proof of their own failure, but as the narcissist's pattern, a script that plays regardless of who the audience is. They no longer take it personally. They no longer internalize the blame. They recognize the emotional manipulation for what it is, a desperate attempt to control perception and avoid vulnerability. And in that recognition, the narcissist's power begins to crumble. It is not dramatic, it is not visible to outsiders, but it is a death of control, because when manipulation fails, the narcissist is exposed. They are left standing in the center of their own tactics, naked and powerless. They do not know how to relate without manipulation. They do not know how to connect without agenda. Their entire mode of engagement is structured around influence. So when that influence disappears, so does their ability to maintain the illusion of power. The empath, meanwhile, no longer engages with the script. When accused, they do not defend. When baited, they do not bite. When praised, they do not lean in. When punished, they do not collapse. This non-responsiveness is not indifference. It is mastery. The empath has reclaimed their own emotional regulation. They have become sovereign. They know their worth and no longer seek it in the narcissist's eyes. They have returned to themselves, and this return renders them unreachable. The narcissist cannot handle being unreachable. To them, it feels like erasure. Their sense of self is built on the ability to provoke, to evoke, to control. When someone becomes immune to those mechanisms, it is not just rejection, it is annihilation. The narcissist is not confronting a person anymore. They are confronting their own irrelevance, and irrelevance is a wound they cannot bear. They would rather be hated than ignored. They would rather cause pain than be dismissed. Because at least then they matter, but the empath's immunity does not offer that. It does not fight. It does not punish. It simply refuses to participate. This refusal is a mirror. It reflects back the narcissist's dependency on manipulation. It shows them that without control, they have nothing to offer, and it terrifies them. They may lash out, escalate their behavior, try new tactics. They may cry, rage, seduce, threaten, but none of it lands. The empath sees through it all. They have seen the pattern. They know the cycle. They understand the game, and they have chosen to step off the board. This is the narcissist's undoing, not because the empath sought revenge, but because they chose freedom. They did not try to change the narcissist. They changed themselves. They healed the wounds that made them susceptible. They strengthened the boundaries that were once porous. They replaced emotional reactivity with inner stillness. They no longer needed the narcissist to be different. They simply became different themselves. The narcissist may move on quickly, seeking a new supply, someone else to reflect their image back to them, to validate the illusion. But it is never the same, because somewhere in their memory, they know there was someone who saw them and did not flinch, someone who loved them and then walked away, someone who witnessed the truth and remained unmoved. And that memory haunts them, not because they miss the empath, but because the empath's immunity forced them to see what they have always avoided. The empath, on the other hand, walks away whole, not untouched, but unbroken. They carry scars, yes, but those scars are no longer open wounds. They have become wisdom, and that wisdom is what protects them now. They no longer walk into emotional traps. They no longer confuse manipulation with love. They no longer make excuses for abuse. They have learned the most sacred of all boundaries, the one between truth and illusion, and the moment they made that distinction, the narcissist lost their hold. Because manipulation only works on those who are unsure of themselves. Once the empath became sure, once they trusted their perception, their intuition, their worth, the narcissist's tactics collapsed. The entire architecture of control disintegrated in the face of unwavering inner strength. The narcissist is left circling old strategies that no longer produce results. They become agitated, restless, confused. They cannot understand why what once worked now fails. They cannot accept that the person they once controlled now stands beyond their reach. They may return, attempting to rekindle the pattern, but the door is not just closed, it's gone. The empath has built a new house, one without secret passageways and false mirrors, one where manipulation cannot enter because truth is the foundation. And this is the final undoing. The empath no longer fears the narcissist. They no longer hope for redemption. They no longer need closure. They have become the closure. They have become the authority of their own emotional world. And in that authority, the narcissist holds no sway. Their tactics, once sharp and effective, now bounce off harmlessly. Their words, once piercing, now echo into nothing. Their games, once powerful, now seem pitiful. The empath has become immune, not numb. Not hardened, but discerning. They still feel deeply. They still love fully, but they no longer love blindly. They no longer extend compassion without discernment. They no longer offer empathy where there is no reciprocity. They have turned the gaze inward where clarity resides, and that clarity is what the narcissist cannot touch. It is not anger that breaks the narcissist. It is not revenge. It is not exposure. It is the calm, quiet, grounded presence of someone who once danced in the fire and walked away without burning. Someone who saw every move, every mask, every lie, and chose not to be consumed. That kind of seeing is unbearable to someone who lives through deception. It is the kryptonite to their power. It is the light that exposes the shadows, and once exposed, those shadows can no longer command fear. The narcissist may continue to perform, to charm, to manipulate others who have not yet learned. But the empath no longer lives in that reality. They have graduated, they have risen, and the narcissist can feel that shift, not intellectually, but viscerally. It is a loss that cannot be named, a defeat that cannot be explained, because it is not loud or external. It is the quiet final knowing, you can no longer touch me, and in that knowing, the empath becomes untouchable.